Yes, so we turn to the second of these songs, this one with this haunting image of the lads in their hundreds who will never grow old. We'll be talking a little later about Ivor Gurney and how different he is, but what sort of impressions do you gain of Butterworth the man from working with his music? Is that something you think about at all? Would you? He is quite an interestingly shadowy figure, you know, from the biographical information. This is a man with a terrific lyrical gift, and who his songs are very well balanced, aren't they? They're very sharp, very contained,
clearly formed, and I mean, often sort of strophic with slight changes.
Yes,
but very. I mean, certainly with all of these, they're quite simple, I would say, compared to what happens in Gurney, which we'll come on to. But and certainly the lads in their hundreds is just it's kind of mesmerising. It's not mesmerising. What's the word I mean?
It's almost hypnotic.
Yes.
But I think that that actually Butterworth writes a far more vocal line than Gurney. I think that Gurney makes it the Gurney songs are far more intricate, and in a way the vocal lines are a bit more tortured, that you have to work, whereas with Butterworth, they're songs that anybody walking along the street could really hum them without too much.
And they have a slight folk song influence as well. The simplicity of the tune, whereas, as you say, in Gurney, I use the word angular. The vocal lines and the piano writing. I mean, it can start off very beautiful and simple, but then it just kind of goes crazy.
You don't know where you're going.
Whereas with the Butterworth, there's drama there, but it's more.
So you're saying in a way that you're hearing something in Gurney that tends to bear out the idea that maybe he was already a little on the edge before this war experience started. Yes, and certainly the music that he wrote after the war does. You were talking, I think, Anna, at one stage about how there's sort of the sudden changes that can be in Gurney and the slight
in his cycle Ludlow and Team. I mean, every song. I mean, it starts like, for instance, Far in a Western Brookland, which starts quite simply, and within a few seconds, you're just off on some quite scary journey, and the music gets so chromatic and so explosive, and the rhythms are really
Well, I'll tell you what, actually, since we're building up to this rather nicely, why don't we do the Gurney next and then go back to Butterworth at the end? I think that might make the contrast even more instructive. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Well, this is the song called In Flanders. This is very poignant because Gurney knew very well the part of the country I'm getting to know and love extremely well, having lived in Herefordshire for nearly 15 years now. And like many, the extraordinary profile of the Malvern Hills, which stands out wherever you look, this sort of mini set of Alps in the middle of this rolling English countryside. It's quite bizarre. Elgar loved them, looking at them from Worcester, Gurney from absolutely the end down towards Gloucester.
There's also a place in Gloucestershire called Chosen Hill.
That's right.
Where all of that generation of composers, I only know about them, but Vaughan Williams, Finzi a bit later, all those people that
wonderful Howells piano quartet has a movement dedicated to it.
It's this hill outside of Gloucester, and it seems to go. This road goes up to nowhere, and at the top there's a little church, and a scattering of houses. But there you get the most fantastic view down onto Gloucester and the countryside. And that was another place. The countryside was so important to the English. That's why it was unflatteringly called the Cowpat School, because there was so it was so important to the composers of the early 20th century.
But now we find the soldier in Flanders, in the midst of all this horror in this song, remembering that world. And fascinating the way that the rather seemingly peaceful outer sections are frame something in the middle, which is much more disturbed, isn't it? Well, shall we hear it then? This is In Flanders by Ivor Gurney.
I'm homesick for my hills again.
Yes, it's much harder to take away a sense of a shape in that piece immediately. Butterworth presents you with a very clear form, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But there you notice details. I love that little touch of the jagged Malvern Hill. Just for that moment, there's that ba-dum rhythm, just there.
I think that's, as many songs I can think of as his, that always seems to be the case.
Always.
It starts in a more similar way to Butterworth, but then takes you off somewhere.
And you feel that there's something sparks in his head that makes him go on to almost do something completely different. When you feel that you're settled in the song, you know.
When he just manages to pull you back to the mood of the opening at the end, it's almost like, oh God, yes, that's where we started. Yeah.
And also with Gurney, you know, he set most of these poems out of his they were in his head. So often there are huge numbers of mistakes in the text, but I always sing the words that Gurney wrote, even if they're not the words that the poet wrote, because that's what he had in his head. So there's no point in changing the words to. I mean, often they were only things like sort of their, his, or something like that. But often they're more important words, and I feel it's really important to do that.
The poignancy I feel with this song, because it's marked at the end of the music. It was written in January 1917, Crucifix Corner. And just the number of times he says, my hills again, my hills again. You get it twice at the beginning, and then it comes back at the end. I find it so poignant, the sort of desperation, I just need to see my hills again. I feel it comes through so powerfully.
Absolutely
right. Yes. Indeed, and it is interesting. I have recently heard some of Gurney's later music, which isn't often performed, an orchestral work called Elegy, for instance, which that sparkiness and the changiness is so extraordinary and so disconcerting that actually you sense that maybe he's even lost the sense of the whole altogether. It's actually broken down. Very poignant.
It's also his family tried to sort of hold him together. His brother was very was actually very domineering and tried because, of course, like Gurney was useless with money. He was always asking people for money and always and always there were so many problems, and his brother kept trying to give him work and trying to make him work in the family firm and all that stuff to try but he and I think it was his sister Florence. She was the one that visited him and sort of was kinder to him, but and I think it was who was it Dora, who was the wife of Herbert Howells. She was very kind to him and visited him in the various institutions that he ended up in.
Yes, which was quite enlightened for those times,
Yes.
wasn't it?
Yes,
I think the
quite.
tendency often was to just forget people
Yes,
who were in that
but
position.
not- yeah.
Yes.
But I don't know the actual figure on the number of songs that we still have of Gurney's, but isn't it right that he destroyed an enormous number
I believe
when
so,
he
yes.
was in the hospitals that
Yeah.
he was in? He wrote songs and then he didn't want the public to see them, and it'd be fascinating to see what was lost.
Yes.
Yes, some almost private therapeutic process,
Yes.
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
that
absolutely,
extraordinary
yeah.
improvisation we heard yesterday. Which is still haunting me, I must say.